Welcome to the first ever episode of the Lorcana Test Kitchen, where, just like Taco Bell, we take the items you know and love, and we edit one or two things and call it something new. Now, this late into the set, with set champs already going on, and Fort Worth challenge happening in just a week, you would have to be crazy to pull out something like this, especially with the limited amount of test time that we have left. I'll start by going over the key differences between this deck and the Ruby Amethyst that's dominating Lorcana right now. I'll also leave timestamps in the video, so if you want to know how this does against a particular matchup, so if you want to skip ahead and see how this does against Emerald Steel, Ruby Sapphire, feel free to skip ahead to that section. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone who's tuned in to the recent videos. The support has been going crazy. Everybody that's hit the subscribe button, thank you so much. I do really appreciate it. And I hope I can keep entertaining you with Lorcana videos. Now, off the get-go, you'll notice this deck is perfectly symmetric. We're running 4s across the board, keeping it nice and simple, because we plan on doing some crazy things with some of these inclusions. I'm going to start off with the most unique card that we have here in the deck, and that's going to be Magicka Dispel, Thieving Sorceress. We don't see this card much. She's a 3/4 quest for 2 with a unique ability that allows you to exert her and return a chosen item to that player's hand, as long as its cost is equal or less than her attack power. Now, at its base, this is going to hit things like your Fishbone Quill, your Greatstone Dragon. It's going to get rid of the Spellbook, any Popsicle or Fortisphere. As well, if you play against Amber, it's going to get rid of the Flutes. But what's truly crazy about this card is that it's whatever the character's strength is currently. So if we can boost that up to 7 and we could take lucky dimes off the board and back into the hand, it's going to make getting those item plays that your opponent wants to make really hard. Now, we don't truly get rid of the items. The opponent can just replay it the next turn, but I think us being annoying with this card and making it more expensive for our opponents to play the items that they want to play over and over and over again is something that could really throw off players, especially when you get into a stressful environment like Store Champs or a Lorcana challenge. Then they can easily make a mistake, and our deck is control focused and we can take advantage of that. Now, while Magicka Dispel has that awesome ability, with the 3 strength, it's not really hitting the higher tier items that we want to hit. So we've also included Lumiere to give everyone else on board a +1 in strength. And then we're also running 4 copies of Maui's Fishhook, which means if we get all the correct pieces on the board, Magicka Dispel can take out 7 cost items on her own. Another inclusion for this deck that you don't normally see is going to be the 3 cost Li Shang. Now, we're not using its special shift mechanic in this case, but his ability is your characters with 4 strength or more get +1 lore. This is going to allow us to really turn the dials and push up the tempo while our opponents are trying to replay their items. When you combo this with Lumiere, that means our cards like Lady Tremaine that are not only giving us a +1 card advantage, but are now questing for 3. And our goats, by default, are questing for 2. So now every time you quest your goat and then bounce it, it's going to be worth 3 instead of just 2. And then to just go over the rest of the cards in the deck, we are running 4 copies of the Madame Mim Snake. This will allow us to bounce our cards back and forth from our hand in the battlefield. We're running 4 copies of the Flynn Rider, especially since we're trying to boost our character's strength as high as possible. We're going to hopefully be able to take advantage of that free lore every single turn. Another staple to Ruby Amethyst decks, we're running 4 copies of Madame Mim. This is great as a rush character, but now also if we have a Li Shang on the board, it can quest for 2, which is really nice. We'll be running the 3 cost Sisu that gets more strength the more cards your opponent has in hand. This will play really nice against decks that have like a Diablo or maybe a Steel deck that's running Whole New World. It's going to keep getting that maximum benefit for its ability. We're running 4 copies of Merlin Rabbit for the card draw. And then finally, for our control removal, we're running 4 copies of the Maui, 4 copies of Lady Tremaine, 4 copies of Brawl, 4 copies of Be King Undisputed, and 4 copies of Be Prepared. Now, I personally like to run Lady Tremaine and Be King Undisputed because it gets around things like Ward, but feel free to switch this around. I know some people like to balance that load with Madame Medusa so they can pick the target. Personally, I think if we have enough rush characters in our deck that we can clear the board and leave them with only 1 choice, which would be a real good character that they want to keep on the board. I've included 4 copies of the Queen's Castle here just to really push the tempo and push the card draw. If we're constantly forcing our opponent to worry about replaying their items, A card like this is really going to be able to get us to 10, 12, 14 lore very quickly, especially if your opponent has to keep paying the tax in order to play their items again. So that's it for the deck overview. It's trying to take something well known and throw a twist on it, which may make it better or may make it worse. I think finally having a way to deal with items is something that's really strong and something that Ruby Amethyst really doesn't get to play with. So this combination is going to be something that really throws off your opponent, especially when you're just playing a best of two and you're going in blind. Now, for specific matchups, this deck in particular still holds all the same strengths as a traditional Ruby Amethyst list, but we get a little bit stronger against your blue steel players and your Ruby Sapphire players. Against a mirror match in Ruby Amethyst, our addition of Magical Dispel doesn't give us anything extra, except if they're playing a spellbook. But since we're getting more lore for the same characters that our mirror partner is running, we could potentially have an advantage thanks to the other inclusions. All right, so now on to the meta deck matchups. We'll start with Emerald Steel, as this has been one of the most popular decks that we've seen at challenges. And depending on your location, it could be one of the most popular decks at your set championships. Now, our version in particular doesn't gain much of an advantage against Bucky and Diablo, but including things like our Sisu card and using our Be King Undisputed and our Lady Tremaines, we're hopefully going to be able to counter that Bucky and also benefit from the Diablo, meaning that now we're getting more lore per turn because we've included that Li Shang in the list. We still need to worry about all the removal spells that your opponent's going to have at their disposal, but you're going to play this matchup pretty much the same way as it normally goes. We're going to look to get rid of the Diablo with a Brawl as soon as we can, and then we're trying to get our Queen's Castle down so that we passively get lore while also drawing cards, and then we can start building up our board state to just answer anything that your opponent's going to be playing. Luckily, even though we're going to have to discard a lot of our cards, Ruby in general has a much more powerful base when you get their 5 or 6 ink. So as long as you're keeping the Emerald Steel player controlled in the first couple turns, you should be able to pull it out in the end, especially when we're going to be questing for more and more lore than a Ruby Amethyst player typically does. All right, and next up, we'll go over our matchup against the Sisu deck, Ruby Sapphire. This deck in particular is going to be where our version of Ruby Amethyst will shine the most. We're going to be able to get rid of that Quill before it's able to ramp too much. Now, they will still be able to play it again on the next turn, and since Quill is an instant use item, they'll still be able to ramp every single turn. But instead of playing their 5 or 6 cost characters very early, or their Be Prepared very early, they're going to need to make a decision and use that 3 ink to replay the Quill every single time that you remove it. This should be enough to delay their big hitters in time for us to do what we want to do with our endgame state. Other than that, the deck's going to play pretty much the same. We're going to save our Brawl in our hand for the Hiram so that it gets the least amount of use as possible. And then we're going to try to use our Bounce package and our Queen's Castle to sneak in some lore here and there and keep it within reach, trying to also keep the red-blue player from getting to the critical point of playing a Tamatoa and playing their Lucky Dime. Hopefully, if it gets to that point, we have our Magical Dispel on board and we can get rid of the Dime, which in these matchups, delaying just a single turn from that combo should be enough to seal you the game by the last lore. All right, and now on to my personal favorite deck of the format, Sapphire Steel. The Ruby Amethyst special deck would terrorize the Sapphire Steel deck, especially if they're running Quill or Greatstone Dragon. Being able to delay that ramp is going to allow you to set up your board in such a good way that you should be able to get within striking distance of winning the game way before they're able to play their Tamatoas, their Aerials, or their Tinkerbells to really deal with what you're doing on the board. In this matchup, we're not going to use Magical Dispel to get rid of Popsicle and Fortisphere. It's really not worth that, and you're giving them extra card draw. But we're going to save it for the Quills, and if we can boost her up enough, we could even use it on the Lucky Dimes to prevent those big swings and lures per turn. Other than that, we're going to do a similar thing with Ruby Sapphire, where we're saving our Brawls for Hiram, and then we've also got Be King Undisputed and Lady Tremaine to get rid of things like the Cogsworth, things like the Aerial at the end of the game. We're going to force them to be smarter with their ink, which, when we're being a menace and removing their items, is going to be something that's easily overlooked, especially towards the end of the day at one of these competitions. As a Ruby Amethyst player, we don't mind getting Whole New World because our deck is full of a bunch of removal. While Sapphire Steel really wants to get certain cards at certain points of the game, we'll just be reacting to whatever they get and whatever they play. We're not too concerned with if they're running a Whole New World or not. If they are, we do benefit more from having more cards because we have more removal. And in this version of the deck, with us questing for a lot more than a traditional Ruby Amethyst player, we should be able to put on the pressure and finish out the game before they can set up one of those plays. So giving us 7 new cards to have removal and to deal with their board state as well is just icing on the cake. If they are playing no wheel, then we're just holding our brawls. We're holding our Be King Undisputed just so we can get rid of the only way that they can draw cards, which would be that Hero. I think this deck in particular would be super interesting to play around. If this deck profile does get enough traction and you want to see it in action, I'll go build it for my wife and let her kick my butt with it. She already gives me a run for my money playing 2 meta decks. Playing a deck that super counters the deck I'm playing would just be over the top, and I think something awesome to see. And then finally, I'll just talk briefly about the mirror match. This is something where we're going to be playing a lot of the similar cards that our opponent's going to be playing. So we just need to keep in mind that anything that we have for removal, they're going to have as well. We do have a little bit less card draw than a traditional Ruby Amethyst would have. So our Sutsu might be getting more value than theirs. And because our characters are going to have +1 strength, if we have our Lumiere out on the field, we typically will be trading in a +1 advantage whenever they're coming at us. For this matchup though, anytime you see magic or dispel, you can safely ink it unless they show a Sorcerer Spellbook. Other than that, I think we're just trying to rush out our Li Shang, rush out our Lumiere, and then just start getting that free extra lore every single turn and forcing our opponent to respond with our tempo style gameplay. And that has it. What'd you guys think of this style of video? I'm really interested in seeing what other combinations we can come up with. Instead of taking a meta deck and changing out a few cards, I think we're going to focus more on combining colors that don't really belong together or don't really go together at the current moment. If you are new to the channel, if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe. We'll be continuing to make lorcana videos with gameplay, unboxing, and deck techs, and traditional deck techs. And I'd love to have you as a viewer. If you're heading out to Fort Worth this weekend, I wish you the best of luck. If you're crazy enough to bring my crazy deck to it, let me know in the comments. And if you're just going to a set championships, I hope you come back with an Ursula. I'll see you guys again next week for some more lorcana content. I hope you have a fantastic day. See ya.